The transport ship Horizon's Edge dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that ran through every deck plate. Jake Morrison felt the familiar twist in his stomach as artificial gravity adjusted to normal space. He stood at the observation window watching Tartarus 7 grow larger on the screen. The planet looked like a dead rock floating in space, gray and lifeless under the light of its orange sun. Jake had seen plenty of ugly planets. During his 15 years as a Marine, he fought on Kepler 3 where the air could melt your lungs and acid rain fell every day. He survived 3 tours on New Mozambique where everything that moved wanted to kill you, and most things that didn't move were just waiting for their chance. But something about Tartarus 7 made his skin crawl. Maybe it was knowing what lived down there in that massive crater that scarred the planet's surface. "First time seeing the pit, Morrison?" asked Captain Luke Barnes, the transport commander. Barnes had been running prisoner transfers for 8 years and acted like he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. "Yeah," Jake said, not taking his eyes off the planet. "Heard stories, though. Stories don't do it justice. Wait until you see it up close." Jake turned away from the window and walked back to the cargo bay where his team was checking their gear. Corporal Danny Walsh was cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that morning. Private Lisa Grant sat on a supply crate reading a datapad about prison protocols. The newest member of their unit, Private Kevin Ross, looked green around the gills and kept staring at the deck plates. "Ross, you okay?" Jake asked. "Just thinking about what's down there, Sergeant. 50,000 of the worst killers in the galaxy all locked up in one place." "They're locked up for a reason," Jake said, "and they're going to stay that way. We drop off our cargo, do a quick inspection, and get out. Simple job." Their cargo consisted of 12 human prisoners convicted of various crimes across the outer colonies. Pirates mostly, with a few black market dealers and one guy who sold weapons to rebel groups. Nothing compared to what was already waiting in the pit, but dangerous enough that they needed a Marine escort. Jake had read their files during the 3-day journey from Earth. The worst of the bunch was probably Carl Weber, a former colonial Marine who went rogue and started hitting supply convoys. Weber had killed 17 people before they caught him. In civilian prison he would have been a nightmare. In the pit he would just be another number. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All hands prepare for atmospheric entry. Docking in 20 minutes." Jake gathered his team and headed to the prisoner transport section. The 12 convicts sat in magnetic restraints, their hands and feet locked in metal cuffs that would respond only to authorized codes. Most of them stared at nothing, lost in their own thoughts. A few watched Jake and his Marines with the flat, calculating eyes that came from years of violence. Weber looked up when Jake walked past his seat. "Deathworld Marine," he said quietly. "I can smell it on you, Kepler 3? Jake stopped and looked down at the prisoner. "What makes you think that?" "The way you move. The way you watch everything at once. I served there too before I went freelance. Hellish place." "Yeah, it was. Shame we're on different sides now, Sergeant. We could have been friends." Jake didn't answer. He had learned not to get drawn into conversations with prisoners. It never ended well for anyone. The ship shook as they entered the atmosphere. Through the small windows, Jake could see the surface of Tartarus 7 rushing up to meet them. The planet had no oceans, no forests, no cities. Just endless gray rock and the massive crater that housed the galaxy's most secure prison. The crater was 5 miles across and nearly 2 miles deep. As they descended, Jake could see the prison built into the crater walls like some ancient city carved from stone. Level after level of cells and corridors spiraled down into the depths. Energy barriers glowed blue between the levels, containing the prisoners in their designated sections. The landing pad sat on the crater rim like a metal island in a sea of rock. Security towers surrounded the pad, their weapons tracking the incoming transport. Jake counted at least 20 different defensive positions, all aimed at anything trying to leave the crater. The ship touched down with a gentle bump. Jake heard the docking clamps engage and felt the artificial gravity adjust to match the planet's pull. Through the thick windows he could see alien guards moving into position around the ship. Most were Xanthari, tall humanoids with gray skin and 4 arms. A few humans walked among them, probably former military like himself. "Gear up," Jake told his team. "Stay sharp and keep your eyes open. This place has a way of making people nervous." They strapped on their armor and checked their weapons one final time. The standard procedure was to escort the prisoners to the intake facility, observe the transfer process, and then do a brief inspection of the security systems. Coalition regulations required regular checks of all maximum security facilities, especially one that held prisoners from so many different species. The airlock hissed open, and Jake got his first taste of Tartarus 7 air. It smelled like ozone and metal with an undertone of something he couldn't identify. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard, enough to make his armor feel a few pounds heavier. A Xanthari wearing the uniform of a prison administrator approached the ship. His 4 arms moved in the complex gestures that served as formal greeting among his people. A translation device on his chest converted his clicking speech into standard galactic. "Welcome to Tartarus 7, Marines. I am Administrator Vexcar. We are prepared to receive your prisoners." Jake stepped forward and gave a crisp salute. "Sergeant Jake Morrison, 3rd Colonial Marines. We have 12 prisoners for transfer and orders to conduct a routine security inspection." Vexcar's large black eyes studied Jake for a moment. "Of course, the paperwork has been processed. Follow me and we will complete the transfer quickly." As they walked across the landing pad toward the prison entrance, Jake noticed something that bothered him. Several of the security towers showed red lights instead of green. When he pointed this out to Vexcar, the administrator waved one of his hands dismissively. "Minor technical difficulties. The solar activity in this system sometimes interferes with our equipment." "Nothing to concern yourself with, Sergeant?" Jake nodded but made a mental note to include the observation in his report. In his experience, small problems had a way of becoming big problems very quickly, especially in places like this where one mistake could mean disaster for everyone involved. 3 days after the prisoner transfer, Jake was reviewing security footage in the prison's administrative level when the first warning came through the communication system. The automated voice spoke in calm, measured tones that somehow made the message more frightening. "Solar storm approaching. All personnel prepare for electromagnetic interference. Estimated arrival in 47 minutes. Jake looked up from his datapad and saw Administrator Vexcar's 4 hands moving rapidly across multiple control panels. The Xanthari's usually calm demeanor had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. "How bad is this storm going to be?" Jake asked. "Our scientists miscalculated its intensity," Vexcar admitted without looking away from his screens. "What they predicted as a minor event appears to be a Class 5 solar storm. We have never experienced anything of this magnitude." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. He had been through solar storms before on various planets, but always with proper preparation and backup systems. A Class 5 storm could knock out electronics for hundreds of miles and disrupt power grids for days. What about the containment systems? They are designed to handle Class 3 storms at maximum. Beyond that, Vexcar made a gesture with his upper hands that Jake's translator couldn't interpret, but the meaning was clear enough. The prison's main power grid was already showing strain. Jake watched the status displays as power fluctuations rippled through the facility's 17 levels. The energy barriers that kept 50,000 dangerous criminals locked in their cells flickered like candles in the wind. "We need to evacuate the horizon's edge," Jake said. "Get them to a safe distance until this passes." "Already done." Captain Barnes departed 20 minutes ago with orders to maintain position beyond the storm's effective range. Vexcar's third hand operated a communication device while his other arms continued working the control systems. "All external ships have been ordered away from the planet." Jake felt the first real spike of fear. If the transport ship was gone, he and his team were trapped here until the storm passed and rescue arrived. In a normal facility, that might mean a few uncomfortable days. In a place like Tartarus 7, it could mean death. The storm hit exactly when predicted. Jake was in the Central Command Center with Vexcar and a dozen other prison officials when every screen in the room went white with static. The main lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency power. Somewhere in the depths of the prison, an alarm began wailing. "Containment barriers failing on levels 12 through 17, reported a human technician, whose voice cracked with stress. Backup power holding on upper levels but showing instability. Jake grabbed his weapon and activated his communication unit but heard only static. How long until the barriers fail completely? At current power. Drain, perhaps 2 hours for the lower levels. The upper levels may hold for 4 or 5 hours if we're fortunate. 2 hours. Jake thought about the files he had read on the prisoners held in those lower levels. The worst of the worst. Species so violent that even their own governments had given up on rehabilitation. Things that killed for pleasure and creatures that viewed other sentient beings as nothing more than food. "We need to get to my team," Jake said. "The transport lifts are offline. You'll have to use the emergency stairs, but I wouldn't recommend it. The prisoners on level 8 began rioting 30 minutes ago when their barriers started flickering." Jake checked his weapon and headed for the exit. "Which way to the stairs?" Vexcar activated a wall display that showed a schematic of the prison. Red warning lights blinked across multiple levels, and Jake could see that the situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had expected. "Follow Corridor 7 to Junction 12, then take the access tunnel down 3 levels. But Sergeant, you should know that we've already lost contact with 6 guard stations. The automated defense systems are offline and most of our security personnel are trapped in sections that have lost power." Jake studied the map and memorized the route to where his Marines were stationed. "What about weapons? Do you have an armory?" "Level 4, Section C, but the access codes may not work with the power fluctuations. I'll worry about that when I get there." Jake left the command center and immediately realized how bad things had become. The corridor was filled with smoke from electrical fires, and he could hear shouting and screaming from multiple directions. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow that made shadows dance on the walls like living things. He reached the first stairwell and found a scene of chaos. 2 human guards were trying to hold a position at the top of the stairs while something large and angry pounded on the emergency door 3 levels below. Every impact sent vibrations through the metal structure. "Sergeant!" one of the guards called out when he saw Jake. "Thank God, we've been trying to reach the command center, but communications are down. What's the situation?" "Scarn berserkers broke out of level 11 about 20 minutes ago. They killed Administrator Vexcar when he tried to negotiate with them, then started working their way up. We've been holding this position, but our ammo won't last much longer." Jake peered down the stairwell and saw gouges in the metal door that looked like they had been made by massive claws. Scarn were 8-foot-tall reptilian humanoids known for their incredible strength and complete lack of fear. In their berserker state, they could tear through steel with their bare hands. How many of them? At least 6, maybe more? Hard to tell with all the noise they're making. The pounding on the door suddenly stopped. Jake heard voices speaking in the clicking, hissing language of the Scarn. Then silence. "They're planning something," Jake whispered. "We need to move, now." The 3 men started up the stairs as quietly as possible, but they had only climbed 2 levels when they heard the door below explode outward. The sound of heavy footsteps on metal echoed up the stairwell, moving fast. Jake pushed the 2 guards ahead of him and took up a rear guard position. When the first Scarn head appeared around the corner below, he put 3 rounds center mass. The creature stumbled but kept coming, black blood streaming from its wounds. "Keep moving," Jake shouted. "These things don't go down easy." They reached level 6 and Jake slammed the emergency door behind them, but he knew it wouldn't hold for long. The corridor ahead was dark except for the emergency lighting, and he could hear sounds of fighting from multiple directions. Other prisoners had obviously broken free and were either battling each other or hunting down guards. "Where are your weapons?" Jake asked the guards. "Armory is 2 levels up, but the access tunnel is blocked. Some kind of electrical fire." Jake thought quickly. His Marines were stationed on level 3, but getting there meant going through increasingly dangerous territory as more prisoners broke free. The armory was closer but possibly inaccessible. And somewhere in the depths of the prison, 50,000 of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals were being released from their cells one level at a time. Behind them, something heavy slammed into the door they had just closed. Once, twice, then a steady rhythm that meant the Skarn had found them again. Jake checked his ammunition and realized he was down to 2 full magazines. "This way," he said, leading them down a side corridor. "We're going to find my team and figure out how to survive until help arrives." The door behind them exploded inward just as they reached the next junction. Jake heard the hunting calls of the Skarn echoing through the corridors and knew that the real nightmare was just beginning. Jake found his Marines holed up in a maintenance room on level 3, along with 8 other guards and 3 of the human prisoners they had transported. Corporal Walsh had barricaded the door with spare equipment while Private Grant worked on getting the emergency communication system online. Private Ross sat in the corner, his face pale, but his hand steady on his weapon. "Sergeant," Walsh said when Jake squeezed through the barricade, "glad you made it. Things went to hell about an hour ago. What's our situation?" "Power's been failing." "Level by level?" "Last count, we had prisoners loose on at least 12 levels, maybe more. The automated systems are completely down, and most of the guard stations have gone dark." Jake looked around the small room. 15 people total, limited ammunition, no communication with the outside, and surrounded by some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. He had been in worse situations, but not many. "Any word from the command center?" "Negative. Last transmission we got was a general distress call about 2 hours ago, then nothing." One of the human prisoners, a thin man named Paul Davis, who had been convicted of arms dealing, spoke up from where he sat near the door. "Sergeant, I know you. Got no reason to trust me, but I heard things when they were processing us. Heard guards talking about what's down in the deep levels." "What kind of things?" "Vortok assassins on level 15. Kythera swarm creatures on 16, and down on level 17... Davis paused and shook his head. "They got something down there that even the Galactic Council was afraid to execute." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Vortek were bad enough, reptilian humanoids that could blend into shadows and kill with their bare hands. The Kythera were worse, insect-like creatures that operated as a hive mind and could strip flesh from bone in seconds. But if there was something on level 17 that scared the Council enough to imprison rather than execute, that meant trouble beyond anything he had trained for. "Right now we focus on staying alive until rescue arrives," Jake said. "Grant, any luck with communications?" "I'm getting some local chatter on the emergency frequencies. Sounds like small groups of guards are still fighting on levels 1, 4, and 7, but Sergeant..." She paused and adjusted her headset. "I'm also picking up organized communication between prisoner groups. They're coordinating attacks." Jake absorbed this information. Desperate prisoners running wild was one thing. Organized prisoner armies was something else entirely. "Can you tell what languages?" "Skarn, Vortak, and something else I don't recognize." "Lots of clicking and buzzing sounds." "That would be Kythera," said another guard, a middle-aged human named Bill Carter. "Spent 5 years studying xenobiology before I took this job. When Kythera start buzzing in organized patterns, it means the swarm is active." Jake made a decision. "We can't stay here. This room is defensible, but it's also a trap. If they find us, we have nowhere to run." "Where can we go?" asked Ross. "Every level below us is crawling with escaped prisoners. Up, the upper levels still have some power, which means some of the barriers might still be holding. We work our way to level 1 and try to reach the surface." Jake organized his people into a combat formation. Marines at front and rear, guards in the middle with the prisoners, and Grant monitoring communications. They moved the barricade aside and slipped into the corridor. The facility had become a nightmare maze of darkness and violence. Emergency. Lighting cast red shadows that moved like living things, and the air was filled with smoke from electrical fires and something else Jake didn't want to identify. In the distance, they could hear sounds of fighting, screams, weapons fire, and the inhuman roars of alien predators on the hunt. They had made it 2 corridors when they encountered their first group of escaped prisoners. 3 Vortec assassins had cornered a human guard in an intersection ahead. The reptilian creatures moved like liquid shadow, their claws leaving deep grooves in the metal walls as they closed in for the kill. Jake signaled for his team to stop and take cover. The Vortec hadn't seen them yet, but that wouldn't last long. These creatures had enhanced senses that could detect movement and body heat from hundreds of feet away. Walsh, Grant, take the one on the left. Ross, you're with me on the right. Carter, keep the others back and watch our rear. Jake waited until the Vortec were focused on their victim, then opened fire. His first shots took the nearest creature, center mass, spinning it around and giving the trapped guard a chance to escape. Walsh and Grant concentrated their fire on the second Vortec, but the creature was already moving, using its natural camouflage to blend with the shadows. The third Vortec turned toward Jake's position, and he got his first clear look at the thing. 8 feet tall, covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light, with 4 arms ending in claws that could cut through steel. Its eyes were black holes in a skull that belonged in humanity's worst nightmares. The creature moved faster than anything that large had a right to move. Jake put 6 rounds into its chest before it reached his position, but it kept coming. At the last second, he rolled aside and the Vortec's claws gouged chunks out of the wall where his head had been. Ross opened fire from point-blank range, his rifle on full automatic. The creature spun around and backhanded the young Marine across the corridor. Ross hit the wall hard and didn't get up. Jake emptied his magazine into the Vortec's back and saw it finally go down. Black blood pooled around the body, smoking where it touched the metal floor. He reloaded quickly and checked on Ross, who was unconscious but breathing. "Contact right," Walsh called out. Jake turned to see the second Vortec reappearing from the shadows behind their position. Grant had anticipated the move and was already firing, her shots forcing the creature back into the intersection. "Move, move, move!" Jake shouted. 2 of the guards grabbed Ross under the arms while Jake and his Marines provided covering fire. They retreated down the corridor as more shapes began moving in the darkness behind them. "Sergeant," Grant called, over the noise of weapons fire. "I'm getting chatter about human prisoners. Sounds like other groups have figured out that we're not easy prey?" Jake smiled grimly as they reached a secure door and began working to get it open. Word was spreading through the prison that the humans were fighting back effectively. That was good news for morale, but it also meant they were about to become priority targets for every predator species in the facility. "Let them come," he said. "They're about to learn why humans are the only species crazy enough to colonize Deathworlds." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. Whatever was hunting them had friends, and they were organizing for a coordinated attack. Jake checked his ammunition and realized he was down to his last magazine. Around him, his people were in similar situations. The door finally opened onto a stairwell that led to level 2. As they climbed, Jake could hear new sounds echoing through the prison, the buzzing communication of the Kithara swarm, and something else that made his skin crawl. Something big was moving in the deep levels, and it was coming up. Level 2 was worse than level 3 had been. Jake led his group through corridors filled with smoke and the stench of death, stepping over bodies of guards and prisoners alike. The emergency lighting flickered constantly, creating a strobe effect that made everything look like scenes from a fever dream. They had reached the engineering section when Grant held up her hand for silence. Through her headset, they could all hear the coordinated communications of their enemies. The Vortec, Skarn, and Kithara had stopped fighting each other and formed an alliance with one goal: eliminate the human threat. "How many are we talking about?" Jake whispered. "Hard to tell exactly, but I'm counting at least 40 different voices in the Vortec frequency alone. The Skarn and Kithara numbers are probably similar." Jake did the math quickly. Over 100 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, all working together to hunt down 15 humans with limited ammunition and no backup. In any normal tactical situation, this would be called a hopeless fight. But Jake had learned his tactics on planets where everything was trying to kill you every moment of every day. Places where humans survived, not because they were stronger or faster, but because they were more stubborn and more creative than anything else in the galaxy. "Carter," he called to the guard who had claimed xenobiology knowledge, "tell me about the environmental systems on this level. Standard life support, artificial atmosphere, temperature control, waste processing. Why?" "Because we're about to turn this prison into the kind of place humans were designed to survive in, and everyone else was designed to die in." Jake sent Walsh and 2 guards to secure the main environmental control station while he and Grant worked on the backup systems. The human prisoners, led by Davis and a woman named Sue Miller who had been convicted of black market medical supplies, proved surprisingly useful in identifying critical system components. "Ross is coming around," reported Carter, who was tending to the injured Marine. "Probable concussion, but he can function." Jake nodded and turned his attention to the environmental controls. The system was more complex than anything he had worked with, but the basic principles were the same as the equipment he had used during survival training on hostile worlds. "Grant, can you access the atmospheric controls?" "Working on it. These systems are designed to be tamper-proof, but I think I can bypass the safety locks." Jake studied the schematic displays while Grant worked. The prison's life support system was designed to maintain perfect conditions for multiple alien species: temperature, humidity, atmospheric composition, and air pressure, all carefully balanced to keep everyone comfortable. Comfortable was the last thing Jake wanted his enemies to be. "First thing we do is drop the temperature," he said. "Vortac are cold-blooded. Below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, they move like they're swimming through mud. I can do that, but it'll affect us too. We've all done cold weather training. They haven't." Jake worked on the atmospheric controls while Grant handled temperature. The prison's air recycling system could be modified to introduce trace gases that were harmless to human lungs but toxic to most alien respiratory systems. It was a technique he had learned during the siege of New Mombasa, when colonial Marines had held off a Skarn assault force for 3 weeks using nothing but environmental warfare. "Davis," Jake called to the arms dealer, "you know anything about improvised weapons?" "More than I probably should," Davis admitted. "What do you need?" "Whatever we can make from maintenance supplies. These aliens are about to learn what humans do when they're backed into a corner." For the next hour, Jake's group worked to turn the prison level into a death trap designed specifically for human survival. They lowered the temperature to 50 degrees and increased humidity to the point where Vortac would have trouble maintaining body heat. The atmospheric mix was adjusted to include industrial solvents that would burn Skarn respiratory systems and cause Kithara nervous system disruption. Davis and Miller proved remarkably creative with improvised weapons. They turned cleaning chemicals into contact explosives, maintenance tools into bladed weapons, and electrical components into shock traps that could disable anything that touched them. "Contacts approaching from below," Ross reported from his position near the stairwell. Despite his head injury, the young Marine had insisted on taking a guard position. "Multiple species moving in formation." Jake checked his modified rifle and smiled. "They have found a cache of maintenance ammunition, industrial cutting charges designed for equipment repair." Davis had shown them how to modify the charges too. Work in their weapons, creating rounds that could punch through alien armor and keep expanding after impact. "Remember the rules," Jake told his people. "We're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to survive long enough for rescue to arrive. Use every advantage, exploit every weakness, and never give them a chance to coordinate." The first wave hit the stairwell entrance with precision that spoke of military training. 6 Vortic assassins moved in perfect formation, their natural camouflage making them nearly invisible in the dim lighting. But Jake had expected this. The modified atmosphere hit them before they made it halfway up the stairs. The industrial solvents in the air began burning their respiratory systems immediately, and the cold temperature made their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Jake's people opened fire from prepared positions, using the improvised ammunition to devastating effect. The Vortak had been expecting to fight humans with standard weapons and tactics. Instead, they found themselves in an environment that favored their prey and facing weapons designed specifically to kill them. The second wave consisted of Skarn berserkers, massive reptilian creatures that depended on their incredible strength and aggression. But the modified atmosphere affected them even more severely than the Vortek. The chemical irritants sent them into convulsions, and the cold temperature made their muscles seize up. "They're adapting," Grant reported from her position monitoring communications. "I'm hearing orders to withdraw and regroup. They're bringing up something called deep-level assets." Jake felt ice in his veins. Deep-level assets meant level 17. And level 17 meant whatever was down there that even the Galactic Council had been afraid to execute. How long until they reorganize? Maybe 20 minutes? But Sergeant, I'm also picking up something else. Sounds like rescue signals from the surface? Could be our people coming back? Jake allowed himself a moment of hope. If rescue was coming, they just had to hold out a little longer. But 20 minutes was a long time when you were facing the worst killers in the galaxy, and he still didn't know what was coming up from the deep levels. "Everybody check ammunition and prepare defensive positions," he ordered. "Whatever comes next, we make them pay for every inch." In the distance, something roared with a sound that made the entire level vibrate. Jake had heard that kind of roar before on planets where apex predators ruled ecosystems that had been killing for millions of years. But this was different. This was the sound of something that had been designed by evolution to kill everything it encountered. "Ross, can you still fight?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Whatever's coming, I'm ready." Jake looked around at his people, Marines, guards, and convicted criminals who had somehow become a fighting unit. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing enemies that most humans had only heard about in nightmares. But they were still breathing, still fighting, and still making. "The aliens pay for every attack?" "Let them come," Jake said quietly. "Time to show them what Deathworld tactics really look like." The thing that came up from level 17 was not supposed to exist anymore. Jake had read about the Ravagers in classified military briefings, an extinct species that had supposedly wiped itself out in a galactic war 3,000 years ago. But the creature climbing the emergency stairs toward their position was very much alive and very much hungry. The last one, as the prison files had called it, stood 12 feet tall and moved with the fluid grace of a natural killer. Its body was covered in armor-like scales that shifted color to match its surroundings, and its 4 massive arms ended in claws that could cut through starship hull plating. But it was the intelligence in its 6 black eyes that made Jake's blood run cold. This thing wasn't just a predator, it was a tactician. "Everyone fall back to the inner corridors," Jake ordered. "We can't fight that thing in open space." His remaining people, now down to 11 after the previous attacks, moved quickly through the engineering section toward the maze of maintenance tunnels that ran through the prison's core. Behind them, the Ravager's hunting call echoed through the corridors, a sound like metal tearing that seemed to vibrate in their bones. "Sergeant," Davis called out as they ran, "I still got about 30 pounds of those improvised explosives. If we can get that thing into a confined space... Do it. Miller, help him set charges in the main junction. Grant, see if you can reach any of the other survivor groups." Jake positioned his Marines at choke points while the prisoners worked frantically to prepare their trap. The Ravager was taking its time, methodically checking each room and corridor as it hunted them. Jake could hear it communicating with the Alien Alliance, coordinating their final assault on the human position. "Got contact with 2 other groups," Grant reported. "Guard Station Alpha on level 1 has 6 people, and there's a mixed group of guards and prisoners holed up in the old administrative section. But Sergeant, they're all reporting the same thing. Their alien prisoners have stopped attacking them and started running away." Jake understood. The other species in the prison recognized what the Ravager was and wanted no part of sharing space with it. The creature from level 17 was so dangerous that even the galaxy's worst killers were retreating rather than face it. "Charges are set," Davis announced. but we'll need to get that thing right into the junction and then trigger them manually. The electrical interference is too strong for remote detonation. I'll do it, Jake said. Sergeant, no, Walsh protested. Let me handle this. You're the only one who knows how to coordinate with the rescue teams when they arrive. Jake looked at his people, Marines who had followed him through hell, guards who had trusted him to keep them alive, and prisoners who had somehow become part of his unit. They were exhausted, running low on ammunition, and facing an enemy that had conquered civilizations before humanity had even learned to use fire. New plan, Jake said. We're not just going to kill this thing. We're going to bring down this entire level and bury it under a few thousand tons of rubble. He sent Grant to the structural engineering station while he and Walsh prepared charges at critical support points throughout the level. The Ravager was getting closer, its hunting calls becoming more frequent as it narrowed down their location. Structural analysis complete, Grant reported. If we take out supports 7, 12, and 18 simultaneously, this entire section will collapse into the level below. But Sergeant, we'll need someone to trigger the charges after everyone else evacuates. Jake had already made his decision. Get everyone to the surface access tunnel. When you reach level 1, trigger the emergency beacon and guide rescue teams. To any other survivors, we're not leaving you behind, Ross said firmly. The young Marine had recovered enough from his concussion to argue, which Jake took as a good sign. That's an order, Private. With respect, Sergeant, screw your orders. We came down here together, we leave together. Jake looked around at faces that showed determination instead of fear. These people had been through the worst night of their lives, and they weren't going to abandon him now. Fine, Jake said. But we do this smart. Davis, Miller, take the charges to support points 7 and 12. Walsh, Ross, you're with me on 18. Grant, Carter, get to the communication station and guide any rescue teams away from this section. The Ravager's hunting call was much closer now, coming from just 2 corridors away. Jake could hear its claws scraping against metal as it moved through the passages. Searching for their scent trail, they split up and moved quickly through the engineering section. Jake reached support point 18 and began placing charges, while Walsh and Ross stood guard. The structural beam was massive, designed to hold up millions of tons of prison levels above them. Contact, Ross called softly. Jake looked up to see the Ravager's head appear around the corner at the far end of the corridor. The creature's 6 eyes fixed on them immediately, and its hunting call changed to something that sounded like satisfaction. Charges are set, Jake announced into his communicator. Everyone get clear. The Ravager moved toward them with terrifying speed, but Jake noticed something important. The creature was favoring its left side, and there were scorch marks on its armor where previous defenders had managed to wound it. The thing was tough, but it wasn't invulnerable. Davis, Miller, report, Jake called. Charges set at 7 and 12. We're moving to the evacuation point. Grant, Carter? Communication beacon is active. I'm getting response signals from the surface. Rescue teams are 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. Jake looked at the Ravager as it approached their position and realized they weren't going to have 20 minutes. The creature had stopped its advance and was studying them with obvious intelligence. It knew they were trapped, and it was planning something. New plan, Jake said into his communicator. Everyone trigger charges on my signal and get to the surface. Don't wait for confirmation. Sergeant, what are you doing? Walsh asked, what I was trained to do. Protect my people and complete the mission. Jake stepped out into the corridor to face the Ravager directly. The creature tilted its massive head and made a sound that might have been laughter. Up close, Jake could see that its scales were covered in scars from thousands of battles across the galaxy. This thing had been killing for millennia. You're the last one, Jake said to the creature. Your whole species is gone, and when I'm done here, you'll be gone too. The Ravager's response was a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. It charged forward with its 4 arms spread wide, claws extended to rip Jake apart. But Jake had fought monsters before on planets where the wrong move meant death. He waited until the last possible second, then rolled aside and triggered the charges. The explosion was bigger than he had expected. Support beam 18 didn't just collapse. It shattered, sending chunks of metal flying through the corridor like shrapnel. The Ravager was caught in the blast and thrown against the far wall, black blood streaming from multiple wounds. Jake heard the other charges detonate in sequence as his people followed his orders. The floor began to buckle and sag as the structural supports failed one by one. Ceiling tiles crashed down around him as the level above started to collapse. The Ravager struggled to its feet, wounded but still dangerous. It looked at Jake with what might have been respect, then charged again. This time Jake wasn't fast enough. One of the creature's claws caught him across the chest. Tearing through his armor and sending him flying, Jake hit the wall hard and felt RIBS crack. Blood filled his mouth and his vision blurred, but he forced himself to stay conscious. The Ravager was advancing for the kill when the final support beam gave way. The collapse was like an earthquake. Tons of metal and concrete crashed down from the levels above, filling the corridor with debris and dust. Jake rolled behind a fallen beam as chunks of ceiling the size of vehicles smashed into the floor around him. When the dust settled, Jake found himself in a small pocket of space surrounded by twisted metal and broken concrete. The Ravager was somewhere under the pile of debris, either dead or trapped. Jake tried to move and realized his legs were pinned under a steel beam. His communicator crackled with static, then cleared enough for him to hear Grant's voice. "Sergeant, rescue teams are on level 1. What's your status?" "Alive," Jake said. "But I'm going to need a construction crew to get out of here." It took 12 hours for the rescue teams to dig through the collapsed levels and reach Jake's position. When they finally pulled him from the rubble, he was the only living thing they found in what had once been the galaxy's most secure prison. 50,000 inmates and 3,000 guards, all dead or buried under millions of tons of debris. The official report listed it as a catastrophic structural failure caused by the solar storm. The classified addendum told a different story. One Marine sergeant had single-handedly prevented the escape of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals and eliminated the last member of a species that had once conquered half the known universe. Jake spent 6 weeks in a military hospital while his injuries healed. When he was finally released, he found a new assignment waiting for him. Coalition intelligence wanted him for a deep space mission to investigate reports of Ravager technology. On the galaxy's outer rim, he accepted the assignment without hesitation. The galaxy was a dangerous place,